The killing in Sudan has been described as the first genocide of the 21st century. Unprecedented acts of terror began in February 2003 when the government backed campaigns against the non-Arab and natives of Darfur. However, this deep ethnic rivalry had been brewing for centuries before reaching the eyes of the international public. Millions of southern Sudanese individuals have been enslaved by the Northerners, and following the legal eradication of slavery during the turn of the 19th century, religious, political, and ultimately ethnic hate have been growing into something intolerable. What we will show you today will serve as evidence to the atrocities occurring within Darfur. These images may be graphic and hard to watch, but we believe it is important that the world is aware of this reign of terror.
In Chad, refugee camps along the border are struggling to keep up with hundreds of thousands of people leaving Darfur. The UN estimates place the number of people needing humanitarian aid at 6.9 million. Chad lies along the western border of Darfur. To get there, people traverse miles and miles of desert and endure awful conditions. For some, it is a walk to safety, but to most, it is a walk of death. Even if you make it to a camp, there is always a risk for disease, such as hepatitis, as well as starvation. Insecurity within refugee camps leads to violence, banditry, and recruitment of children into militia groups. Extreme violence leads to the abandonment of some refugee camps, driving further instability amongst the refugees. Clean water, food, healthcare, and sanitation are scarce within camps. The dearth of available resources leads to starvation, hunger, and disease, making life even within refugee camps miserable and difficult. Frequent attacks from bandits or rebels make it difficult for aid workers to assist on site. Hospitals, whose locations are well known to the government, are routinely bombed by government-sponsored militia groups. When looking at the refugee camps, a noticeable feature is the number of children. Most of these children have been orphaned because their fathers were killed in the initial attacks and their mothers raped.
The ongoing violence in the Darfur region of Sudan lies in the tense hostility between the Arab Northerners and African Darfurians. While the Northerners are a mix of Bedouin and Middle Eastern descent that adhere to strictly conservative Islam, the Darfurians are primarily native Africans who follow a blend of Islam and the indigenous religions of the region, with the latter retaining the primary evidence. The formal origins of direct enslavement between the two broad ethnic groups date as early as the 17th century, where the ethnic groups in Darfur, broadly called the Fur, were captured as slaves for the northern government, as well as for the trans-Saharan slave trade. Over the centuries, growing ethnic tensions between the lighter-skinned ethnic groups that ran the government and the darker-skinned individuals of Darfur caused violence to be common, with the lighter-skinned Sudanese viewing themselves as superior to the African natives.
The Janjaweed are a loosely organized militia group supported by the Darfurian government that has been leading the attacks against the people of Darfur. The word Janjaweed can be translated as devils on horseback because the attackers ride on horses and camels during their raids and use scorched earth tactics in order to destroy villages. These tactics include burning villages, looting cattle, raping women, and poisoning the water supply by dumping dead bodies into wells. Around 400 villages were destroyed, and millions of civilians displaced. The Janjaweed were equipped and armed by the government to put down dissidents among the people of Darfur against autocratic decisions and the denial of basic rights of a citizen by the government. President Omar al-Bashir has ensured that the Janjaweed are heavily armed, well supplied, and regularly coordinated with the Sudanese regime's ground and air force. Throughout his 26-year and continuing tenure as Supreme Dictator of Sudan, President Omar al-Bashir has utilized the Janjaweed as his personal enforcer to silence his enemies.
You would think that a government-backed genocide, such as this, would call international attention to itself. And yet, the genocide in Darfur has gone largely unnoticed. Many words have been spoken, but little action has been taken, especially within international governing bodies, such as the United Nations and the African Union. As famed British playwright Tom Stoppard said, "If the United Nations could die of shame, it would have been dead years ago." The International Criminal Court has issued warrants for arrest and indictments against President Omar al-Bashir, the first president to have been indicted for a genocide against his own people. However, he has been undeterred and continues his campaign against the natives of Darfur. One has to imagine, had this incident occurred in a first world country, the international community would have been outraged, responding immediately to this injustice. The killing and kidnapping of foreign aid workers alone should have caused sentiment within foreign nationals. Why do the people of Darfur continue to suffer from these attacks with little aid being sent to them from around the world? When will justice be served?
To this end, the United States will propose that the next UN Security Council resolution on Sudan request a United Nations investigation into all violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law that have occurred in Darfur, with a view to ensuring accountability. Mr. Chairman, as I have said, the evidence leads us to the conclusion, the United States to the conclusion, that genocide has occurred and may still be occurring in Darfur. We believe the evidence corroborates the specific intent of the perpetrators to destroy a group in whole or in part.
The U.S. government declared the Darfur crisis a genocide in 2004, but has yet to do much about it. The UN has an even worse record. While it did set the United Nations African Union mission in Darfur to provide aid to the region, this program has been largely seen as a failure. Furthermore, the International Commission of Inquiry on Darfur issued a report to the Secretary General stating that the government of the Sudan has not pursued a policy of genocide. Eric Reeves is a professor of English in Massachusetts who has been researching the Sudanese crisis virtually full-time for 15 years.
Having testified before Congress, lectured and consulted extensively on the situation in Darfur, he has become the foremost expert and advocate for Darfur. Through his essays and writing on his website, SudanReeves.com, his book, Compromising with Evil, An Archival History of Greater Sudan, 2007 to 2012, and opinion editorials in various newspapers, no one else has risen to his level of prominence. Through Reeves' research and publications, the word of Darfur has spread. SudanReeves.com contains hundreds of articles updating the situation of politics, individual turmoil, and refugees. Eric Reeves' main informant is a shortwave radio station called Radio Dabanga. The station has been broadcasting since December of 2008. Currently, it broadcasts for 3 hours a day. Radio Dabanga features news in Standard Arabic, Darfuri Arabic, Fur, Mazali, and Zagwa. The station reports news of displaced people, attacks, and general information on the people of Darfur. It is currently the most listened to station in Darfur.
Beginning in 2010, the Doha Peace Forum, an internationally facilitated meeting, began discussing issues relating to the Sudanese government's relations with regions demanding independence. On July 9, 2011, the southern area of Sudan broke off from Khartoum to form the new nation-state of South Sudan. However, while South Sudan received independence, Darfur was only granted minor local autonomy. Furthermore, government-sponsored militias continued ethnic purging through bombing and burning villages, raping women, and child trafficking. If South Sudan could fully secede from Sudan, why can't Darfur? After the devastation caused by the Holocaust, we swore to the world that never again would a genocide occur while we stood idly by. So after examining the situation in Darfur, we must ask ourselves, why is this happening? Again.